everyone, welcome to another episode of Land Chatter. Today I am sitting down with Mark and Keith Zylstra. We recently sold his feedlot and had a equipment auction for him, so we are going to be asking him a few questions about the process.
Yeah, thanks for joining Land Chatter again today, folks. We greatly appreciate it. And Keith, thanks for being on this morning.
You're welcome.
We appreciate the opportunity to work for you and Vicki. It's been fun and exciting. So
thank you.
Yes, we've gotten to be part of your family over the last year of your life.
We've spent a lot of time together in the last little while.
Yes, we have. Yes. So Heather, I'm going to let you kind of go through your process of an interview today with Keith. And again, thanks, Keith, for being part of Land Chatter. So
you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so first question. What made your feedlot unique compared to others in the area?
I'd say what made our feedlot operation so unique is that it's located along a major state highway in a very busy county blacktop, and we were always being watched by everyone for what we did. And it was very important to myself and to my employees to always have things picked up and clean.
Yes.
Because I always said we are being watched, and a clean place doesn't smell as bad as a messy place.
Right.
Very true, Keith.
Yeah.
And put it this way, you had a first-class operation, too.
Thank you.
Yes, and it was a privilege to sell it.
Thank you.
All right. When you look back, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of the expansion we did to the feedlot 12 years ago.
Okay.
It was a 1,000-head feedlot that was not in very good condition anymore. And I always had a goal to make it larger, and I always had a goal to have confinement buildings. And when we were faced with some problems with the DNR and the EPA, I made the decision to cooperate 100% with them, and in that process expand. We tripled the size of the operation.
Wow.
And building it from what it was when I took it over from my dad to what it was when Mark helped sell it, and having the confinement barns up is what I'm the most proud of.
Good, good.
And I can assure you this, Keith, the new buyers appreciate the facilities you enhanced and put up through the years, that's for sure.
Good, thank you.
You grew it from a smaller operation to over 2,500 heads, so yes.
All right. Selling a feedlot is not a small decision. What led you there?
Well, that's a long process. What led me there is my age and nearing retirement, not wanting the huge workload that we had. And what led me to selling it was making the decision if it was going to work to have one of our kids come in and continue it as a family operation, or whether it needed to be sold to an outside entity. Mm-hmm. And so what led us to that point is, where are we at in our lives? Where are we going to be with retirement? How involved do I want to be when I'm partially retired? And so it was a long process to get to that.
Okay. So what were your expectations going into the land and facility sales?
My expectations were that, first of all, I needed to work with an organization that would be able to represent us well. And that's why I chose Zomer Company to do that. Our expectations were that I needed to involve someone that had widespread coverage, would do well at advertising, would do well at helping our family work through this process, and then transfer both the feedlot and then ultimately some of this machinery into other hands, while respect was paid to what we had done through our whole career.
Yep.
Go ahead.
What surprised you most about the process?
I think what probably surprised me the most is how involved the process actually is. With all of the paperwork, all of the preparations, several meetings here with Blake and Mark ahead of time, visits out to the feedlot, taking pictures, doing interviews, the scope of advertising to get both our machinery and our facility out to the public, knowing that a livestock operation, and specifically a cattle feedlot, is a unique thing to sell because not everybody's looking for it like a piece of land. It's much different than if I call Mark and say I want to sell a piece of land, because you have a smaller audience and you have a lot larger process to go through to reach a small audience.
Right.
I would agree with you, Keith, and I think as one man put it to me one time, the easy part's buying a feedlot. The hard part is filling it up with cattle and buying all the equipment to run it, right?
And the hard part is selling it when you decide to do that.
And the other thing, too, Keith, selling a high-class feedlot like you have, buyers appreciate that, because sometimes you sell a feedlot that needs so much work and so much attention. Yours, they could come in and operate day one because it never ceased operations. You know what I mean? So
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's true. Very true.
Appreciate that.
All right. What advice would you give someone thinking about selling a livestock operation?
The advice I would give is start farther ahead than what you think you need to in the planning process, because it is a longer process than what you probably want it to be and what you think it's going to be. So I think to have goals set farther out and make those goals attainable is important, because it's a bigger process probably than what I even realized.
Right, right.
I would agree with that, Keith. The old saying, successful things don't just happen, you have to market them.
That's right.
Yes.
That's very true.
Yep.
So after the feedlot sold, then you had your equipment auction. We just did that this past week. How was that experience different?
Well, it was very different in that it brought more finality to the process.
Yep.
While we were working on selling the feedlot, we weren't really even concentrating on the feedlot, on the machinery, other than we'd put together a list of everything that we had that pertained to the feedlot, offered it to the new feedlot owners and said, this is what we have. There's a price here. Let's negotiate on this price. They chose to bring in their own equipment, which was fine. And so I kept the equipment part of it off to the side until we had finished and closed and transferred the feedlot. Then that became a higher priority for us. And that was much different because we knew that we would attract numerous buyers to an auction, as opposed to a much smaller audience for the sale of the feedlot.
True. Yep. Yep. So was it harder or easier to let go of the equipment compared to the feedlot itself?
In some ways it was equal.
Okay.
Some of the pieces of equipment we'd had for a long time. They were an integral part of our operation. It's easy to say, well, it's just a piece of machinery, but all of that machinery helped us accomplish what we needed to in the process. The answer probably was easier to let go of the machinery because it was the second sale. The emotional part of it happened a little more with the facility.
Yep.
A family facility that my grandfather started, and then my father, and then I, with the help of my kids as they were growing up. So that was probably harder because there's a little more sense of commitment to a property that you've been on, and certainly more sentiment involved than in machinery.
Sure.
One thing, Keith, I have to remember, we sold your 7810 on your equipment auction, and Keith had always made the promise that he would never get rid of Vicky, and he'd never get rid of the 7810.
Yeah,
so he kept Vicky and sold the tractor. Yes.
There was a quick little story behind that. A nephew of mine who was in high school, my wife is a retired high school teacher, and she was still teaching at the time, and my nephew was in high school and working for me, and he jokingly said, when are you going to get rid of the 7810? A 7810 was a tractor that we'd had for a long time. It was kind of our pride and joy, something we took a lot of pride in keeping. And I said, well, there's two things I'm never getting rid of. I'm never getting rid of the 7810 or Vicky. So he went to school the next day and told my wife that little story. We had a little joke about that today.
Yes.
So.
Okay, looking back, is there anything you would do differently?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe start the process a little earlier, but there's one thing that Mark hasn't mentioned. When I first met Mark and Blake and Bryce, was probably 3 years ago, we had 2 hog confinement setups, 6 hog barns, and that was the first thing that we chose to sell in our operation.
Okay.
And so I had not met anyone from the Zomer company when I called them and said, you guys sell hog buildings? And Mark said, we sure do. So it was quite a long process. The hog building thing took a little different way of getting sold than what we started with. And then through that process, I just said to Mark, we're probably going to sell our feedlot down the road. Mm-hmm. Are you interested in helping us with that? So we started this process with the Zomer company longer ago than what it appears. So I think my advice is make sure that you start it as early as you can.
Sure.
Sometimes they think they're going to list it and sell it in a month, Keith, but there's a lot of prep work that goes behind the scenes prior to that. That's a side of the business that people never see.
Right, right.
When I first invited Mark and Blake and Bryce to come out, he said, well, we're going to come out, we're going to go through all 6 of your hog barns. And I said, do you realize how bad you're going to smell when you come out of the hog barn? He said, I'm not selling something that I haven't gone inside to see and make suggestions as to what should be done. Because he said, I can't bring a prospective buyer there without knowing what they're like inside.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. All right. Now that both sales are behind you, what's next?
Well, what's next for us is that I'm going to continue crop farming for at least 5 years.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, my wife is a retired school teacher. We have 7 growing grandchildren. Raising them and helping be part of their lives is important to us. They range from 1.5 years old to 9 years old, and we want to be part of that. So what's next for us is enjoying some more time at Lake Okoboji with them and with some of our friends, continuing to crop farm and not having quite as much stress in my life as I did.
What was something behind the scenes of the sale that most people wouldn't realize?
We talked about that a little bit earlier, Heather. It's the prep work that goes on from a standpoint that a lot of people never see by a company as professional as a Zomer company. Each time Blake would call me or Mark would call me or the 3 of them would come out, Bryce would come out along sometimes also, is all of the things that had been done. They said, well, we've done this or we've checked into this, and I would present some legal things or some questions about some legal documents, and Mark said, well, I've already taken care of that. So I think what we don't understand is how much work people like yourself here in the office and Mark and everyone that's involved in your company is doing for us. I often will have people say, well, how much did they charge you to sell that?
Yeah.
Or what does it cost to have them sell something? And I usually say you can't really put a price on what it cost me to sell. And yes, we can, because at the end of the day, we know the dollars that were spent for Zomer Company to auction our place or to have the feedlot sale. How much money was raised by the work that they did through the auction process, through the advertising? You really can't put a price on that. So the behind the scenes work is what goes on here in your office and goes on the phone calls and goes on with the legal people that just gets done that we didn't see.
Right. All right. So then how has the cattle business changed from when you started to now?
It's gotten much more competitive.
Okay.
When I expanded our operation 14 years ago, I made the comment to people, then I was 52 years old, and I said, well, this is easily large enough for the balance of my career. And the truth of the matter was it really wasn't. We're getting swallowed up. Operations like ours are getting swallowed up just like any other business that's going on. And if you can't figure out to align yourself with someone that is larger than you, you're going to fall behind. The overhead costs for running our operation were just as high as if we'd have had 5,000 or 6,000 cattle. The employees, the equipment, all of that could have served a little bit larger feedlot. Not a 20,000 head feedlot, but it could have served one that was larger than ours. So it changed in that there again you need goals and what you see for the future. And my thought process and my scope wasn't quite far enough out because we nearly got swallowed up by the time we sold our business.
Okay.
And you know what, Keith? You had a very viable operation, 2,500 head set up, beautiful buildings, shop, machine sheds, concrete cattle lots, very, very nice facility structure. But you're right, there's integration that keeps happening. And, as you knew, back in 2012, you expanded to where you're at today. And I think it'd be true to say if you were going to stay in the business, you'd expand again.
We would have had to.
Yes, yeah.
And had I been a little bit younger, I probably would have taken that next step. Or if I was sure that a family member was going to come in, we probably would have taken that step.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
There actually were some things that we would have done. It gets cumbersome because we were operating under a stringent EPA permit, and you need to realign all of those things. You don't just decide I'm going to add another 1,000 head cattle barn.
Keith, you touched on it a little bit ago, but I always think it's interesting when you're selling a feedlot, a hog barn, or I'm going to say a livestock sector of an operation. components that go into the paperwork, the manure easements, the leases, the right to apply manure, the feedlot permits, the well permits. There's just so many things that go behind the scenes that transfer ownership. That's what the general public doesn't see. They see you put a sign up, they heard you sold it, they seen you signed a purchase agreement, but you remember the painstaking day when we had to go through all those details, and you were here for 6 or 7 hours. That's the side that people don't see. So
That's right.
Yep, I agree with you.
And there again, that's something that I was prepared for, but didn't know exactly how to prepare for the day that we were here with Blake and Mark and the new owners, the two gentlemen that purchased it. And my list was, I thought, fairly complete. I learned as we went through that Mark's was much more complete.
You bet. Go ahead.
All right. No, you're good. What did a good day at the feedlot look like for you?
That's really quite easy to answer. I was a person that took a lot of pride in cattle comfort.
Okay.
And if it was a cold, windy, snowy day, and when I arrived in the morning, there were cattle that were uncomfortable because of the elements that were out of my control, I would never leave without seeing to that, to the best of my ability, every animal had a pen that was cleaned and had bedded and could be comfortable.
Right.
And if I were going to leave at the end of the day, regardless of what time it was, much to the chagrin of my employees sometimes, it was that every pen had to be equally cared for. And so that when I drove away at the end of the day and I looked back over the pens and all the cattle were laying down, and on a cold winter day the steam was rising up over them, but they were comfortable, that was a good day for me, because I had accomplished what I felt I needed to as a livestock person for the care of animals.
And another good day, Keith, was if there was not a fountain that was frozen. That's right. And it wasn't a blizzard, right?
Speaking of frozen fountains, just the other day, a person who is a few years younger than me, but he was always the most willing to stick with me. He grew up in Texas, and he can't stand the cold, but he would never leave me if I was sitting beside a fountain. And he said, "Do you miss thawing those fountains?" And I said, "No," but I said there was satisfaction in thawing a frozen fountain and knowing that those animals could have water.
Could have water. Yep.
And he said, "Never did I see you be the one to leave unless it was for more hot water before the fountain was fixed." And I said, "No." I said, "We owed it to the livestock to give them the best we could."
I got to share you one funny story with the two of you a minute, Keith. I was at a rather large feedlot the other day, and I was in the office visiting with the gentleman, and on the wall behind his desk, he's got a picture on the wall, and it's a set of 3 cowboys working cattle through a chute, and it is 10 below zero, and it is blowing snow so hard that Charlie and Henry can hardly see each other. And the one guy says to the other one, he said, "Just think, we do all this to take care of these cattle and produce a great steak, and somebody puts ketchup on it."
I'll remember that the next time I'm in a restaurant and see someone do that.
All right. What's a lesson from the feedlot that applies to life in general?
I think to take pride in what you're doing, in whatever it is. It doesn't matter if you're in education, if you're in agriculture, if you're running this business, to take pride in what you do.
I agree.
Oftentimes I would come home during this whole process feeling a little sorry for myself and whining a little bit to my wife about, the new guys aren't going to take care of something the way I did. The new owner's not going to treat that machinery the way I did. She said, "You know what? It was the same thing when I left my classroom after teaching for 33 years. I knew that the next person wasn't going to do it the same way that I had done, and I needed to accept that fact that things do change, and that doesn't mean it's better or worse than you were doing. It means it's different than what you were doing."
I agree.
And that you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit hard for me because, of course, we always tend to be a little bit selfish. And I would say to Vicki, "Well, but I grew up there." And she would say, "But I taught in that room for 33 years. And she said, "The day I walked out, I knew it was never going to be the way I had done it. And it was never going to be, quote, mine again."
No, I agree.
So it's very similar.
All right. What advice would you give a younger person starting out?
Seek advice from experienced people. Don't necessarily do it their way, but seek advice from them because they learned some lessons that they could pass on to you that you wouldn't have to learn yourself. I always think, I have a neighbor who I have a great deal of respect for, and he would always say to me, and my dad kind of had this saying also, he would say, school's never out. And
It's a good
Yeah,
model.
that one is.
Yeah.
I think to be willing to learn from someone that has already learned something, instead of trying to teach yourself, you're going to get ahead faster.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that's a good
That's
one.
good advice. Yeah.
All right. So, what do you hope people remember about your operation?
the way I cared for the place, the way I cared for animals,
The animals, yeah.
and the way I intended to leave it prepared for the next person, whether it was a family member or, in this case, since we sold it to an outside entity. I want people to drive by and say, I remember how that was when Keith and his wife and employees were taking care of that place. I remember how they changed it during his time of ownership. Do you remember how it was when he bought it from his dad? Look at how it changed to the time he sold it. So I will never brag about what I did, but I want to take pride in
Pride
the
in
growth
what
we had,
Yep.
and I want people to remember
Absolutely.
that we took good care of it.
Absolutely.
Yep. How important were the neighbors and relationships in the community in your journey?
Extremely important. I jokingly said earlier in the interview that a clean place doesn't smell as bad as
Yeah.
a dirty place.
You know what? A clean tractor runs better too.
It does. Neighbors you need when you're in the livestock business. You're working with neighbors for feed, for disposing of manure, for having help. Those relationships are extremely valuable. And Sioux County, Iowa tolerates livestock operations better than Osceola County,
Really?
Iowa.
Okay.
Because almost everyone in Sioux County has livestock like we did in our little part of Osceola County. So we are looked at with a different set of critical eyes by a lot of people, and a lot of people think that, well, it's just one of those livestock operations. And quite a number of years ago, just to throw a little something in here if I could, Heather,
Yeah.
we were asked by the person who was in charge of the county Republican committee if we would host a visit by the governor. And Governor Branstad was our governor at that time, and I said, I certainly will. And he said, well, and this was shortly after we had expanded the operation. We were still building our feed pad. It was under construction. And I said, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to highlight what a livestock operation does for the community and the county. He said, I don't want you to brag about, I did this or I did that in livestock.
Sure.
Right.
I
But
said,
what does it do for
What does it do? And so we invited people who were vendors that we worked with. The truckers brought a truck. The people from Sioux Automation brought some new equipment. We always worked with Sioux Automation. And the people who did our harvesting came with some of their equipment. And I said to all of them, I said, we're not here to show off what we're doing. We're here to show to the people who attend this and to our governor the importance of a livestock operation in agriculture in Northwest Iowa.
But you know, it's true, Keith. I had a guy tell me one time. He said, "You think of a round corn stalk bale when you bale that in the fall." He said, first you chop the stalks, so you got a tractor and a chopper. Or he said you rake the stalks, then you bale the stalks. You got a tractor and a baler running to bale them. And then he said, then you take a payloader and a semi-trailer and you haul them home. Then you take a tractor and a bale processor and spread them in the yard. Or you build a shed to put your bales in, like in your case that you had.
Yes.
He said, stop and think of one corn stalk bale, how much that generates into agriculture. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
We would always joke about that. We baled at least 5,000 cornstalk bales every fall. And usually with two balers, our own balers. And I would always call them on the radio after I'd made the first bale and say, well, 4,999 more of these were done. But what Mark just said is very true. Again, one of our neighbors that we worked with said, well, I don't understand why you let Zellstras come over and rake those corn stalks and get everything off of your ground. Don't you realize what they're doing to your ground? And my neighbor said, don't you realize what they're doing to my ground? They're taking those stalks home, and in his words, he said, they're just dirtying them up a little bit and bringing them right back. And so it is very important that everyone understands that from when that stalk of corn is grown and leaves and its remnants return back to the land, a lot of it happens.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
That's a very good point, Mark.
100%.
All right, and then lastly, if you could sum up your entire experience, what would it be? It's kind of a loaded one.
That's a loaded one.
Yeah.
One sentence is hard, so I'm thinking about that a little bit. It's probably going to be a couple. First
That's
of all,
okay.
I'm going to say it's been a phenomenal experience,
Good.
and it's been a good run. And I think that probably is the best way to sum it up. I think of being a little kid on the same farm that Mark just helped us sell, and now almost my whole working career, my growing up years and my working career, part of that is soon over. So we need to look back and say, what did we accomplish during that time?
Yeah.
So I think to sum it up is to say it's been phenomenal to be a part of it, and I really, truly appreciate all of the people that I worked with all those years and the exposure that I had.
You know, Keith, I often say this: we live in one of the best areas of the world to live in. We got great neighborhoods, we got great schools, great communities. Wonderful people to do business with. Handshakes still mean something.
Yep.
And Keith, I want to just say this personally from Zomer Company. It's been a true honor and a privilege to represent both you and Vicki. And not only selling the feedlot, but selling your equipment a week ago, working with you in the whole process. And, I always say this: to make these things happen, as you well know, Keith, there's a whole army behind the scenes.
That's right.
And Heather can answer to this too, but we have a great staff. We have great people. I want to thank you for coming on Land Chatter and being part of this today too, Keith, because your time is valuable, and Heather appreciates it, I appreciate it, and Zomer Company appreciates it. So,
well, thank you. And then if I could just add to wrap up to that, the whole experience with Zomer Company has been very good for me.
Thank you, Keith.
Until 3 years ago, you and I didn't know each other.
Yep, correct. Yep.
And obviously, I knew about Zomer Real Estate and Auction Company because you're widely known. And someone said to me, how did you choose them? And I said, well, I chose them because of their reputation and because I have a livestock facility to slowly work my way out of. And I've been given advice that there are people there that can help me. Someone said, what's your exit plan? In fact, it was our accountant said to me about 5 years ago, what's the exit plan here? And Vicki quickly spoke up and said, well, there isn't one yet. And so that goes back to the planning that we talked about earlier in the interview. And I consider the relationship that we've established here with you, Mark, and with your company to be very valuable. And it means a lot to me the way you've helped us.
Well, I appreciate that.
Through this process.
Well, we appreciate it too, because Heather knows this. She's heard me say this 1,000 times, 2 quotes, but commissions and fees that we charge are one-time checks, but relationships pay you the rest of your life. And the other side of that is, Keith, without customers, we don't have a business.
That's right.
Yes.
And without people like this company to come and help us, we don't have a way to work ourselves out of the business.
Well, we appreciate that, Keith. And thank you for taking the time
welcome.
this morning. Heather, I'll let you wrap it up here this morning.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time. Thanks.